But like you said, I'm third generation roofer, framer. I'm well versed in all of your waterproofing exterior envelope, as well as thermodynamics. If you have installation questions, I can, be pretty accurate on that stuff too, or at least sound like I know what I'm talking about. I've got 3 presentations. I've got one on metal, I've got one on slate, and one on tile. The one slate and tile I did during the last presentation that I did for this organization. So with that being said, if you have any other questions, I will touch on some flat roof stuff too. I don't know, depending on where you're at, how much you run into that. If you're here in Richmond, you're going to run into it pretty consistently. And so, but I'm trying to tailor it more for all of Virginia too. So, but with that being said, if you have any questions on any other roofing stuff, you can just raise your hand and I'll talk on it. So we'll start with metal. And I'm not gonna really go off the slides too much. I'll just use them as a guide. I don't really like reading off of them, but the metal roofing. We're gonna go to the different profiles of metal and kind of what you're gonna see and what you're looking for. And in some of those profiles, you'll notice that you're gonna see a lot more mistakes than other profiles, and we'll get into that as well. So introduction to metal. Metal's great. If it's done right, it really is one of the best roofing systems that you can put on a residential or commercial property. It's really the only material that can work as well on a steep slope as it can on a low slope, depending on the profile. Incredibly durable, depending on the material. Obviously, the most common materials are going to be mild steel. So pretty much everything that you're seeing high end that is already pre-coated is going to be a mild steel. Your exposed fastener roof, you will see some galvalume with that, and as well as a lot of commercial installation. If you see what looks like bare metal, in almost all cases that's galvalume, which is 55% galvanized steel, 45% aluminum. You will see some copper in obviously higher end neighborhoods, and very rarely you will see zinc in this market. You'll see zinc more at the ocean front because it's a great corrosion resistant metal. It oxidizes very, very quickly in terms of almost a gunmetal grade, but very expensive, very high end. Lifespan from 40 to 70 plus, depending on how well you keep that metal coated and depending on what that metal is. We can talk about some coating options for metal as well. And then, obviously ideal for residential and commercial applications, so pretty much any roof system, there's a fit for metal on that. Categories of metal roof systems. Exposed fastener metal roof systems. You're going to see this more in rural parts of Virginia. We call it sometimes the ag panel, tough rib, tough lock, true lock. It depends on who you're buying that panel from, what they call that profile. But essentially, it is, you see it a lot on metal frame, metal buildings. Like people putting metal buildings in their backyard. Most of the time, the walls and the roof of that are going to be your exposed fastener metal roof, which essentially you just have a fastener that goes through that, and then that fastener is waterproof with a rubber grommet, either neoprene or EPDM. Stamped metal roofs are becoming increasingly popular. There are several companies that are, kind of, hanging their shingle around the stamped metal. Stamped metal used to mean stamped pieces of tin that were all put together, very pretty, very hard to find. You don't really see those in newer installations. Now you're seeing stuff in different profiles that look like slate, look like Spanish tile. They even make one that looks like an asphalt shingle, though I don't know why you would spend extra money on that. But stone coated metal, we've seen a lot of that too, where they're putting a granulation on the outside of that metal to kind of add some rigidity and decrease the amount of metal they're putting in it. I don't really like those. We can talk about that too. And then of course standing seam metal roofs, and that's kind of going to be the high thin version of metal. It is what you're going to see. Again, any of your tin roofs, the old tin that you're seeing through now, is all considered a standing seam. You got the snap lock panel, which is we'll discuss what that is, and then mechanically seamed, which is what most of your commercial buildings are going to have on it, and any of your low slope has to be mechanically seamed as well. So exposed fastener, we just talked about it. Same thing, that's a very popular profile of exposed fastener. The roof typically is going to be a 29 gauge galvalume. Now in steel, the higher the gauge, actually the thinner the metal. Most of your style steel panels are going to go from 22 gauge to 29 gauge. 22 gauge being, in almost all cases, an industrial commercial setting where the roof system is also the roof deck. The 22 gauge mile steel can span structurally over 5 to 6 feet, depending on the profile of the panel, which means you don't have to have a roof deck. That's when you're going to these big warehouses where they have the back insulation that you see with the white plastic, and above that is the roof. The metal panel is also the roof deck. So what you're stepping on there, below it is just insulation and then the factory floor. But the exposed fastener roof, like I said, you're going to see that a ton more outside of the city in the world. Mostly once you start getting closer to Appalachians, you see it everywhere. It is sold as a 40-year roof system, which is why you see it. It is very comparable to an asphalt shingle roof installation. But like I said, that roof is only as good as that rubber grommet on that screw. So yeah, you're getting a 40-year coating guarantee. Typically, Kynar or Sherwin-Williams, not a knockoff. Sherwin-Williams, Kynar, their patent ran out. Sherwin-Williams has moved into that space, making the identical coating, so it's not all Kynar anymore. But those rubber grommets, that's one of the things that you're really going to want to check. Obviously, on this one, you see the screws are backing out. That's obviously leaking. But what you want to see, what you want to look at is the actual rubber grommet itself. So most of the ones that you're seeing that are going to be old, and you can tell it's old by how chalky the metal itself is. If those screws are over tightened and that neoprene is pancaked out where it is getting the UV exposure, sun exposure, it will dry rot that grommet, and you'll start getting spot leaks all over the roof. There are coatings that you can put on for that. You can also do a full re-screw. The re-screw is pretty expensive. The coating is also not inexpensive, but it's definitely something you want to flag. Also, on these types of roofs, where you're going to see the most, how do I put this? The installation defects, what we'll call that. And it's because you can buy this panel very inexpensively. It comes in 3-foot sheets by 10 foot if you buy it from Lowe's, but you can get it from these manufacturers that are rolling it off in any length you want. And so guys that do not have a ton of metal experience will take this roof on because they're like, oh man, I'm putting down 3-foot sheets. A lot of times they're going right over the shingles, they're not tearing it off, which is an acceptable installation technique. I wouldn't call it the best installation technique, but it is acceptable. But they'll go right over the top of it, so they're saving on the tear off. They're putting the roof on in 3-foot sections by the whole section. And that's all well and good until you run into a wall or a pipe or a trailer. And a lot of, I've seen a skylight done 25 different ways because they're just looking at it like, I don't even know. We're just going to figure this one out. But in panels, it's kind of hilarious. I would look for, and I won't get into the weeds of how to properly flatten a skylight. But I will say, anytime that you're seeing a ton of silicone on the roof, that's what they're going to do. They're going to say, well, that's pretty close, and the silicone is going to make up the difference. So if you're seeing a lot of the silicone, I would flag that and say, I shouldn't be seeing this much silicone. So that's going to be anywhere where you have, like I said, walls, pipes. So I would tell you that. So pipe collars on metal roof. This is not just for exposed fasteners, this will be across the board. The acceptable way, most manufacturers, what they want you to do is take a neoprene grounded pipe collar, goes over that pipe, and then you put a bunch of screws around that to create a gasket to the metal. That's going to be exposed fastener, stand seam, whatever. That's an acceptable practice. Slate Pro, we don't do that. And I'll tell you why. Because same thing, eventually that gasket is going to fail, right? That neoprene is going to wear out. You've got about 10 years on any exposed neoprene on any roof. Once that fails, you're never going to get another good gasket around that pipe. And so it becomes a much larger repair, or you're relying now on that caulking. So you will see in some cases where a pipe comes through a piece or through a metal roof and you see nothing around that pipe. We see guys flag that all the time. That is a proper installation of that. You can literally put a separate piece of metal underneath of the metal, get you some rings of silicone, and then tight fit the panel over top of that pipe. And then you have a clean bead of silicone around that. I wouldn't flag that. That's a great installation technique. Because yes, that silicone will fail before the roof fails, but it will last longer than the neoprene. And when it does fail, you go up there, you clean that silicone, you put another bead of silicone, you got 25 more years on that pipe. So we do that a lot if we're not doing preformed metal, custom metal pipe collars. And to build a custom metal pipe collar, it's $450. So most customers are not paying for that. They would much rather go with that 25-year bead of silicon. So that's something to look at. Now, in the last 5 years, the grommets on these screws have pretty much exclusively shifted over to EPDM, which is great. They got a metal cap on top of it, and then there's an EPDM grommet underneath of it. Now, you're not going to notice a difference on that. So all you're looking for on that grommet is it frayed around the edges? Does it look like it's been overdriven, a bunch of rubber sticking out where the sun can see it, and is it cracked and frayed? Because if it is, it's leaking, or it's getting ready to start leaking. So that's what I would flag for that. And then again, any piles of silicone. Foam closure strips. So you see the cap up there at the top? Anywhere where you have a trim piece, and then there's that, because you can't avoid that gap, well, you can, but they're not going to. Avoid that gap in where the rib, the gap between the rib and the field of the metal when you have that cap going over, that's on wall pieces and all kinds of stuff. There's a foam closure strip, which is just, a dense foam, like almost like pipe insulation foam, that has a little bit of adhesion on it. It is made to match the profile of the metal, so you put that on, and then the cap of the wall piece comes under. You can literally just tuck your feet under there and feel for it if it's there. You want that to be there because that's how you're keeping wind-driven rain, definitely wind-driven snow out of those gaps. And if you don't have that, you're gonna have issues with specifically wind-driven snow. You will get leaks there. So that's something that I would definitely flag about the color. Questions on exposed fasteners. All right. Stamp metal, we've talked about it. So this is becoming increasingly popular. In fact, the major roofing manufacturers are now starting to move into this space, but it tells you the popularity and the money that there is to be made in it. For the last 10 years, this has been kind of popping up, and there's been more independent companies that have been making it. They're just making this stamp metal. Most of it, again, is 29 gauge, very thin. And in fact, it kind of has a rule of thumb, the more bends you see in a piece of metal, the thinner it will be. Because as you're putting a bend, or in this case, a stamp like you see in that slate right there, the more of that you have, all that is doing, it's obviously adding an aesthetic, but really what it's doing functionally is it's adding rigidity to that piece of metal. So the more bends you put in a piece of metal, no matter how thin it is, you are adding some structural rigidity. Same thing with that exposed fastener roof. Yes, it's 3 feet wide. That's why you have all of the humps and the bends, and even in those humps, you see little bends and crimps, and they're never going more than about 2 inches apart before you got another little striation or bend in it. It's just adding rigidity to a thin piece of metal. So these are, I like the stamp metal. To be honest with you, they do have some heavier duty 26 gauge stamp metal that if we were going to do a stamp metal, that's what I would prefer because you are getting that heavier stuff. The stone coated stuff I do not like. It is paper thin. Before they put the stone coating on, the problem is, you can't install a roof without walking, right? And so if you're putting down a stamped piece of metal and you're walking on it, and the damn thing's bending under your feet, it's a beat up roof by the time you pull your ladder off of it. Call that the tail light warranty. So you can't see the tail lights, no warranty. Again, this is popping up, becoming ever increasing. Now, again, we've done it a bunch on facades downtown in Richmond, because you'll notice you got 2 square of slate and everything else is a flat roof off the back. This is a great alternative to natural stone slate, because obviously a lot cheaper. I would also look for punctures in this, so I will tell you that one downside to the sand metal is the repairability. It can be repaired, but it is a pain in the ass to repair. So they all work together. So you can see, let's see if I can work this. I'll do it. Yes, sir. I'm trying to do that. I don't know how to do it also.
You don't point it at anything.
Just point it.
Well, just point it in the sky. I don't care, but you have to hold it down.
Okay.
Now move it. There you go.
Hey, there we go. I almost forgot what I was talking about, trying to figure out the IT. So you'll see here, this is an actual seam in this metal, and so is this. And so right here, terrible. This is not that user friendly house, I'll be honest with you.
Takes practice.
Yeah, that's all right. We're gonna abandon it. But they all lock together. So it's all four sides of that. So on the sides, and then, so you got a hem, and then a hem, and then the next piece hems into it. So it hems at the bottom, and it hems to the next piece on all four sides. It's great for wind uplift. But if you get a bullet hole, we repair bullets all the time. If you get a bullet hole, then pulling this piece out, you're gonna pull four hems out. And I don't know if you've ever taken an aluminum can or something, you bend that thing back and forth, but that metal will break in you if you're trying to hem it and then put it back in. It takes specialty tools to do it, and it takes some time and some cut up fingers, but it can be done by a metal professional. Again, a lot of the stamp stuff, like the exposed fastener stuff, there are guys that have been historically shingle guys, that shingle guys, that are now pushing into this because you're still using nail guns, same tools you use to put a shingle roof on. A lot of guys are using to put this on. It's the same thing in the field. It's very easy. They're all locked. Once you get your first row going, you're locking them all together, and then you're just nailing them down with root nails. In most cases, and then the problem becomes, well, what do I do with this valley? Or what do I do with this skylight? What do I do with this pipe, this wall, this dead valley? You know, super complicated areas like that. So, at any given point, I would look at if you've got a dead valley or a dead wall, just go ahead and look at that. You'll know if the roof done right, how that's done. But that's something to definitely look at. So punctures, and then the same thing, just glob the silicone. Now, I will say with these, in almost all cases, the silicone comes the same color as the roof. So the silicone might not be as easy to see. But you definitely want to be paying attention to that. Pipes can also be done the same way that I described before, but in almost all cases, you're buying this as a kit, and the companies that sell it also make preformed pipe collars that can go into it, or like they do require some lifetime collars or different things like that. So you will see some pipe collars that are designed for the system that are included in that. Questions? Yes, ma'am. You can walk on it. You can walk on it if you want to, you know. I would say on the stone coated stuff, I'd stay away from it. Because it's so thin. If you see like some of the higher profiles like I have here, you can walk on that, but it is incredibly slippery too. So I mean it's kind of a, you know, if you feel comfortable doing it, go ahead and do it. But just know that depending on, you know, see me, I'm posted 200 pounds. So I'll probably avoid walking on it as much as I can, just to keep from hurting it a bit. Oh, yes, all right. All right, so standing seam metal. They all depend, this is no exposed fasteners in this, and I will say in the stamp metal, just to clarify, you will have some areas of exposed fasteners in that. Typically where if you have wall hinges and teeth and stuff like that, a lot of your, anything that cats, anything that overhangs, over top of it, they do allow some grommets and screws in that, so you will see them in some details. So same thing, just pay attention to those grommets on those. And a standing seam metal roof, you should never see any exposed fasteners. It's one of the biggest proponents of that. Most of your standing seams are going to be 26 and 24 gauge. What you're going to see mostly is going to be a snap lock profile. Unless you're looking at an old roof, and then that's going to be old school hand crank tin. So hand crank tin. So we've all seen this in Richmond for sure, 100 times. Great roof. Great roof. The reason we don't do tin anymore is because we don't produce it here in America anymore. Very malleable, very corrosion resistant, even without a coating on it. In fact, if you were to put brand new tin on, you let that weather for a year before you actually were to paint it or coat it. Because if not, it has such a slick surface, you'll never get any paint to stick to it. So, I've installed these back in the day with my grandfather. He used to hate them. He cussed the whole time. But you let that weather for a year, and then you go back and paint it and coat it. And this also worked really well back in the day when they let you have lead paint. Lead paint worked really good on these. It still would, you know. But so really malleable. So you won't see any. You see on the hips and the valleys don't have a dedicated cap piece because you can roll those hips and those bridges and those valleys the same way you would with copper or zinc because it's so malleable. Again, tin used to be the cheap metal roof version until we shipped all of it. Most of the production of tin now is in India, some in China, obviously. And by the time you ship it across the ocean, you could put copper on it. So that's why tin has really died as a product of roofing. The feel of this metal very rarely ever wears out. So you will see roofs that look like this in this good of condition, and there are problems in the metal because the feel is very strong. What you're going to see is in the internal gutters. Let's try it again. Let's get it. Thank you. Brown, this roof has internal gutters or Yankee gutters, depending on where you're from. But we've all seen those in Richmond too, and in Norfolk and Tidewater, if you're out that way, you will see them much of Norfolk too. But anywhere where that metal is taking a 90-degree bend, that's where the roof is going to fail. Because the same thing like we talked about, when you're bending that metal back and forth, around the chimneys, up walls, anywhere where it's taking a 90-degree bend, as that metal over time is expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting, it is folding that metal. And so you're going to get breaks there. So you might show up and the roof looks phenomenal, but the internal gutters are leaking, or around the chimney is leaking, or up a wall is leaking. And there's no way to properly repair that. You can coat it, you can put a bunch of tar on it, we see that all the time. That's the only thing you can do, because the one downside of tin is, yes, it is malleable the first time. If you were to try to take out one of these panels and unfold that hem, essentially the hem, you got the male piece and the female piece that comes over, and then all of it rolls over together. The clip that holds that down is in that fold. And so if you try to unfold that and then put a new piece of metal in and then fold it back down again, 9 times out of 10 on a 50-year-old metal roof, the hem is going to break. And now you're in a can of worms scenario. So there is no pulling a panel out of this. There's no doing one part of the internal gutter. And so what to look for there is parts of the roof that have been heavily coated and caulked and tarred, because they're trying to repair this one little spot without re-roofing the entire thing. So if you're seeing that, flag it, because that's, at any given time, if there's already a coating or something on it, any coating that you do past that point is only going to stick to what it's sticking to. And so if you're coating over coating and first coating has already failed, you're pissing in the wind. So I tell customers all the time, you're throwing your money away by doing that. Sports, if you want to throw your money away, please throw it away with me. But that is full roof failure, unfortunately. Some places, especially on old road homes where it's flat, we've seen stuff where there's a tear in the middle this long, and we're talking about $30,000 roof, not a $200 fix. So they're not going to be super pumped about that if you miss it. Labor intensive, requires skill and craftsmanship. Most of the skill and craftsmanship to do a roof like this doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. Snap block, stain and seam. So like we talked about, this is what you're going to see most of the time. This is kind of the quick version of stain and seam. It looks like the real thing. It's not really the real thing. It's like Coke Zero, So you've got 2 snap block systems here. So you've got so this is a clipped snap block, and so you can see essentially your male piece has a clip that sits over. You screw that clip in, and then the female piece comes over. You're taking a rubber mallet, and it snaps down over top of that lock. That's why they call it snap block. And so that's the clip version is the better version of snap block because it allows the panel to freely expand and contract. Now, how are you going to know if it's a clipped or non-clipped system? It doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, if the roof's not leaking, if it's not failing, it doesn't matter for y'all's purposes. So what you're going to see most of those is the nail fastener cleaning. The same thing. It is easy to buy in a kit. You don't have to really have specialty tools other than some snips you can get at Home Depot. And some hand benders if you want to get fancy. But you have essentially a nail strip on the one side the same way the vinyl siding would have, if you're familiar with that. And so the downside with the nail fastener flange, yes, it is easy to install, again, until you get to the walls and all of the complicated stuff where it really separates the pros from the don't know what they're doing guys. The idea is there is a slit there, and so you're putting a screw in it. You don't have to worry about the clips. And the idea is you don't put that screw tight enough to where you are pinching the metal to minimize that expansion and contraction. Because anytime that you're putting something in that metal that is stopping it from freely expanding and contracting, which metal is going to do more than any other roofing material, you're creating a pinch point. And same thing, that can create some bind and some twist, and same thing, you're bending that metal now with expansion and contraction cause breaking in the field of the metal. And that works great in practice. The problem is if you leave that screw up on that nail flame at all, it will transpose to the next panel when you put it up. And so what that means is you leave it loose, so yeah, it can expand and contract. When you snap down the next piece, a lot of times, especially walking on it, you'll actually step on a screw, and that screw will put a dent in the metal right up against the seam. Does not look good. Customer does not like that. So guys just screw that screw down so it doesn't happen. So then the panel does not freely expand and contract. So you get a ton of what's called oil canning. So you'll see most of the time you'll get this this panel will have the striations. That's what we call the bends, like the very gentle bends that run through the metal. That is to minimize oil canning. Does anybody know what oil canning is? He does. Well, I'll tell you. It's essentially the bacon effect is what I call it. So when you look up at a metal roof, you see all those like gentle waves up in it. That's what oil canning is. All metal is going to oil can. That is not something for you guys to call out. It doesn't really matter how much it's expanding, contracting. If it's I would not get into weeds for oil canning. Doesn't matter how good you are. Doesn't matter how much the panel expands and contracts. If the sun just hit that thing first thing in the morning, you're going to get some oil canning. Now, a good roof will settle really quick. In the next 20 or 30 minutes, the oil canning will be gone. One that is not allowed to expand and contract freely will be oil canned all the time, anytime you see it, unless it's super cold outside. But that's the downside of most of your snap block. It does not freely expand and contract. Also, the seam of it alone is held just by tension. And so same thing through that expansion and contraction, you are losing some of that tension that's holding that seam together. And so while it same thing, comes with a 35 or 40 year guarantee on the coating, a lot of times you'll start to see the roof system fail because the tension in that snap over time has kind of given up. And panel will start to slide, they'll start to blow and pop up, and then guys go out there and put rivets in and all kinds of crazy stuff with it. But that's what it is. But it looks like the real thing, and it's quite a bit cheaper because it's not nearly labor intensive. So the mechanically standing seam. Now this is going to be, again, this is the only low slope installation that you can then do. It is the same exact concept as the old tin. So you can see on the mechanical seam there, where you at? Right down there. All right. So you see that metal's all rolled over on itself. Now, this is going to be typically 24 or 26 gauge. 24 gauge works better because it does reduce a ton of your oil canning and gives you a much better product at the end. The clip goes in there, same as anything. So the clip goes in over the male piece, and then you've got your screws in it. The female piece comes over, rolls over with the clip included in it. It allows the entire thing to expand and contract, and then you're using either hand crimpers, which do not fist fight a guy that's hand crimping metal all the time. I'll tell you that right now. He's a beast. Or using machines that seam it. And the machines are what really keep turn those guys off to it. A good seaming machine starts around $6,000. And so those guys are not willing to make the investment to do that. And it's still hard to do. To be, even with a $6,000 seam machine, you can mess a seam up, and then you're taking that seam up with needle nose pliers. Go ahead and how terrible that is. It's the worst. Guys are super upset when you're like, hey man, we got to take this seam back up. But it'll take an EF3 tornado because it becomes completely monolithic. All that 24 gauge is rolled together. Like I said, it's freely made to expand and contract, and it can go down to a slope as low as 1/4 and 12, which is flat. The only roof system this cannot be installed on is anything with internal drains. So if you got a big Walmart, where they have the drains internally, you can't do metal on that because you can't seal around that internal drain. You have to have more than that. Outside of that, any low slope row home or super flat front porch, or anything that has, you know, like an A pitch or a shed dormer pitch to it, very low pitch at quarters will take that, no matter the snow load, no matter the wind or rain, it's bulletproof, it can't leak. So the best one. Now the batting panel, I've seen maybe 2 of those in this market ever, but they do happen. I don't know who was selling them, but it's like a hybrid snap block mechanical seam. You see, it's basically just 2 pieces of metal that come together, and then they have the flange on either side, and then there's a trim piece of metal that goes down over top of that you crimp down. It's easier to install than the mechanically seams. It is a better system than the snap block in performance. You still need pitch for that. You can't go super low slip with that. The problem is that I've seen is just like the snap block over time, that batten through expansion and contraction start to lose some of its grip, and you'll start to see strips of that batten sliding out. And you think you can go and just knock that back up with a rubber mallet. You can't. You're going to tear that rubber mallet and the end of that roof up. So anyways, I lost money like that. So yeah, that's essentially most of your damaging. Maintenance and performance. So I will say this: the coatings game is like cell phones. It has completely changed in the last 15 years. Coatings used to be snake oil. You know, guys like, oh, you get 20 years out of this, you get 25 years out of this. And they never lasted more than 2 years, and then they changed the LLC and bankrupted that company, and they did that for a while. But there have been some very successful coatings, specifically for metal, as long as it has not already been coated. So what you'll see, specifically on tin, a lot of times you'll see, and you got to see it on all kinds of roofs, is that aluminized coating. I don't know who came up with that, but they made $1 billion, and it's the worst thing you could ever put on a roof. It's good for UV protection. So if you're trying to protect like a modified bitumen membrane from UV breakdown, it works good for that. It is not a waterproofing material. It does not stick well at all to metal, so it starts to chip and flake and crack off of it. And at that point now you're stuck, right? You can't, just like with any coating, same thing. It only sticks as good as what it's sticking to. And so we go out to these tin roofs, like, oh, I just had this aluminized coating put on 5 years ago, you know, and they want to coat it again. And I'm like, well, yeah, the next one's gonna last 2 months because it's gonna just chip off the stuff underneath of it. If you go out to bare metal or even metal that's been painted with like an actual paint, especially the lead stuff, that can be cleaned and coated with a coating that really truly will last 25 years. Even the newer metal that has a Kynar coating or PVD coating on it, there are 2-part coatings for that, where you're using a Kynar primer that essentially roughs up that Kynar so you can get a good adhesion on the actual coat. The top coat is actually an acrylic, and it will stick to that roof and coat that roof for 25 years. Comes with a guarantee from GAO. They pretty much bought all of the good coatings in America. They are the 9,000-pound gorilla in the coatings game. But as long as that roof has been well maintained and it hasn't been coated with the wrong stuff, you can put a good coating on any metal roof that will extend the life of that roof for, you know, pennies on the dollar per square foot for what replacement would be. But yeah, you know, proper installation, obviously that's going to be the end all be all of that process. Questions? Oh yeah.
I gotta ask.
Yeah.
Let's man a microphone.
GAF owns Flex Seal now. I don't recommend it.
Flex seal.
Yeah. we call that homeowner gone rogue, we call that. I mean, yeah, look, Flex Seal, all that is a plasticized tar. You know, they put enough VOCs in to where it's liquefied and you can spray it. It has its place, you know. If you want to make your roof look terrible and then make it to where I can't actually repair it, please go there and do that. But yeah, I mean, you've seen the guy in the screen doing better. It obviously works.
For a week.
Yes, sir.
Get him a microphone.
Get him a microphone.
I've heard a lot of it talk about this metal roofing, the big guys like GAF coming out with, you know, metal roof solutions.
Yes.
And with the asphalt, if you were going to get a full warranty, 50-year warranty, lifetime warranty,
Yes.
the material had to be installed by a certified installer.
Yes,
Are the manufacturers basically following suit with the metal as well now?
they are. So GAF is first to the party on this. They've come out with a pilot program called Timber Steel. And they are already installing it mostly in North Carolina, I think, where they've started. We have signed up for that pilot program, though we get to do any of those routes. But they are still figuring out, so they're going after contractors like, so, I mean, I'm doing 2 metal routes a week in residential and 1 in commercial every month. And so we do collectively more metal than any of the local guys do. We've got our own roll formers and we've got our, our brakes and all that stuff. And so they're looking for contractors like us because they aren't really sure how to do the walls yet. They've got an idea, but there's a difference of if a wall, if a course of those shingles, for lack of a better term, hit 6 inches from that wall as opposed to 4 inches or 2 inches from that wall, now what do you do? And so you still have to field fabricate a lot of that stuff. And if you're just a shingle guy, trying to field fabricate 24-gauge steel on a mile break that's a non-starter. You're gonna ruin that break and you're gonna hate the whole process. You're gonna do it the one time to be done. But they are pushing into that, and they are going to be including. The idea is to include the same thing: manufacturer warranty to cover installation and the manufacturer defects. And I think honestly, to see because their profile is very flat, it's very clean, almost looks like a Tesla loop. You've seen one of those. It does not have a ton of stamp to it. They are very uniform. I have customers that like it, clean look. I have customers that are like, that's kind of a bland looking roof for the amount of money that I'm going to spend. They would rather do the standing seam, which is comparable in cost if you're working with a company that can manufacture all that stuff on site for you anyway. In any case, the quality of the metal really comes down to where you manufacture it. If you're buying it in a kit, it's never perfect, right? Because the pitch is 612, so you get all your drip edge bent at a 612. Well, there is no roof that's ever square. So, some of it might be a 6.5, some of it might be a 6.3. So you're trying to make that work. So the more you feel fabricated, the better off it will be. So they're trying to close that gap. But I think the whole process is really to figure it out, to turn it into a solar roof. I think that to me, that's where they're headed. They're trying to compete with Tesla on a roof where the material is also making the power for your house. And so I think the metal's kind of an afterthought for that. But yes, as of right now, they do have a pilot program. Again, if you wanted to buy it in this market, it would be one of the most expensive roofs you could put on outside of Slate or tile. And it'd probably take 4 months to actually get everything together to do it. So, yeah. Yes. Hold on, wait for the light. I will beat you up.
Have you seen solar panel installations damage metal roofs? You have a special hardware course for solar panels?
Yes, absolutely. So, if done right, a metal roof is one of the best substrates for solar. Because if there are clipped versions of the racking, and to where essentially just a tension clip that goes on that seam, and then you're not actually puncturing the roof. Now within the exposed fastener roof for different profiles, they don't have that. And so then all they're doing is taking what they call the L foot, which is the part of the bracket that actually attaches to the roof, and then they just screw it through it in silicone again. In that case, I would be very weary of that. Again, it's considered acceptable from the solar company side, but with any solar, all of you run into this now with the prevalence of solar. Solar, the roof is installed, solar's installed, they get a leak, solar company's like, that's the roof, the roof's like, no, that's the solar. You're gonna run into that. But the problem is if you damage that metal roof, that's a much larger problem than if you damage the shingle roof.
And I know we're talking about metal roofs, but
Yes.
I've had clients ask me about that roof renew product that's pushed on.
Yeah, soybeans.
Yeah, and I'm skeptical of it, but I wonder what your take is on it.
Yeah, so okay, so their science, they've got their third party people that have claimed, making grand claims. But like with anything new, I mean, you know, of course, we like to be on the cutting edge. But with anything new, I always tell customers, let's just wait and see what's happening in 10 years, right? If it's holding up to 10, because they're putting a 25-year warranty on it. And it does show there is some promise there. The downside to that is it's not correcting any of the failing flashing details. It's not correcting any of the failing penetration, so pipe columns or anything like that. All it is correcting is the actual asphalt itself. And so for an asphalt shingle is a fiberglass mat sprayed with tar and granulated. The granules are there for UV break functionally, are there for the UV breakdown to protect that tar from UV breakdown. The mat is there to add rigidity and keep that tar from shrinking. The tar itself is the waterproofing portion of that shingle. And it's not even waterproof. The standard asphalt shingle is a water shedding roof. It's not waterproof. You put an asphalt shingle, turn it into a bowl and put water in it, the water would osmose through that. However, as the granules wear off, right, the asphalt is then exposed to the sun. Once it's exposed to the sun, you're on a clock at that point because it's going to essentially just dry out, start to flake off, and then you've got that exposed fiberglass mat. The fiberglass mat's going to start actually leaking water into the root system. And then the overlay will hold it down for a little while after that. If they get there, when you're starting to get moderate granular loss, the claim is the soybean product goes in and it basically re-liquefies or rehydrates the asphalt. And then it's also protecting it from the UV breakdown. So you kind of stop that aging process where it is at. Again, how long is that going to work practically? I don't know. I don't think anybody truly knows. But it does, one, is not inexpensive. You know, it's probably, you know, 40% of what a re-roof is going to cost, not to include any of the repairs that will need to be made. And then you still got an old roof at the end of the day that you're not eligible for another 25 years. So, you know, would I do it on my own house? Definitely not. Would I recommend that to a customer? No, I would explain it to them just like that. So, and I'll be honest with you, for asphalt shingles, of the, you know, hundreds of roofs that we'll do this year, I would say maybe 25 of those have been replaced because they're worn out. You know, we're finding that the craftsmanship of the original install was failing roofs, not the tar in the shingle. You know, it's the flashing wrong, and to replace all the flashing is going to cost you $8,000, or you can spend $20,000 and get a brand new roof, all the warranties and all the things that come along with that. And so most of the customers are weighing heavy repairs from installation defects over the replacement of the roof. Not, this roof, I got all the miles out of this roof I'm going to get. You know, now it's time to replace it. So, which is a complete trend change when I was a little kid. When I was working with my granddad, almost every roof we tore off was as fragile as the Declaration of Independence, because it was installed right the first time. You got all the miles out of it you could get. So, I would say that, you know, we'll see. Long way to say it. We'll see how that works out. But I don't sell it, man, so it's terrible. Don't recommend it to anybody. All right, anybody else? Y'all rather talk about flat roofs, or would you rather talk about slate?
Flat.
Flat. All right, well, I don't have a slide for that, so I'm going right off the cuff. So, all right, so flat roof. What do you see? What's your market that you?
Northern Virginia and DC.
Okay, so you're looking at most of TPO for the most part. Yes.
Modified Bitterman.
Mod, okay. All right, well, yeah, Mod, we'll start there. Modbit's a pretty popular one here in central and southeastern Virginia as well. So modified bitumen, that is essentially a shingle on a roll that you got hot applied modified bitumen, you got cold applied modified bitumen. The hot applied is an old torch down roof. You're putting down what's called a slip sheet, which is just fiberglass slip sheet over top of that. You're rolling it out. You're taking a propane torch and you're heating that until it liquefies, and you're rolling it out. It's actually literally gluing itself down to that fiberglass. In all cases, modified bitumen is good for 15, on the outside 20 years. But a lot of the new mod bit that's coming out now is peel and stick. So you're seeing, especially if you're seeing just like one area in a residential install, almost always, that's literally they sweep it, they roll it out, they peel it out, it's almost like an ice and water shield, like a heavy, bituminous ice and water shield. And then that's getting it here down. Now, the thing about modified bitumen is it can take absolutely no ponding water. So you still need ideally a 212 pitch for that. Once you get into under 1, so 1/2 and 1/4 inch, which is considered true flat, modified bitumen becomes sketchy because if you get any settling in there at all where you're getting any ponding, it's not designed for that. You will get some osmosing water through that membrane, and then you're better off to go with an actual membrane for that. Now, cold applied modified bitumen was where they're taking buckets of tar and instead of heating it, they're just slapping the tar down on that same fiberglass slip sheet, and then that's getting glued down in that capacity. You will see that coated a lot. That is a viable coating option for modified bitumen. Specifically a high solid silicone, which is white. A lot of guys will actually misrepresent that as TPO because it does look like TPO if it's done right and it's clean. And that can add 25 years to the roof, both from a waterproofing and UV breakdown scenario. So if you're seeing one that's starting to alligator, which you're getting that look like alligator skin where it's cracking, that's getting indicative of end of service life. Obviously, any penetrations, any walls, anywhere where you have the laps, that's what I would look at to see if any of that's popping up. Perimeters, like if you have a drip edge that adheres to the perimeter, that's going to be one of your first points of failure in that roof where they're trying to either glue it down, stick it down, or heat weld it down to a metal drip edge. It doesn't really like to stick there, so that's a point of failure. Punctures obviously are a good one. And a good granulated or non-granulated roof, if you've got a puncture, if you got a seam failing, you really can't, that's what tar on a roof is actually designed for, is a product like that. So you can go get yourself a bucket of tar that down, fabric that, tar that, and that can be actually a long-lasting repair on modified bitumen. So if it's in decent shape, it's cheap to repair and maintain. And then if you catch it, 2, 3, 5 years before end of service life, and you don't have the ponding, you can coat that with a high solid silicone and you've got a 25-year roof right there under warranty from GAF or one of their competitors. Yes, sir.
How long would you think that would last if, let's say it is on a low slope?
It depends.
15 to 20?
It really depends on the ponding. That's the biggest thing. I mean, ponding water will kill that system because, again, it's not like, okay, if you got a pond up there, it's just going to rain in the building. If you got a pond up there, now ponding water, so just so we're clear on the flat roof, is any amount of water that sits up there longer than 48 hours since the last time it rained. So if it rained yesterday and there's water sitting on that roof, that's not technically a pond until it's been there for 48 hours. That's in all of everybody's manufacturer's language. But if you do have that, and a good way to tell for that is black and red algae. So if you go up there and you can clearly see there's like this, say it hadn't rained in a month. And you're seeing these areas of like dried, almost looks like soil on the roof in areas that are obviously a low portion. That's indicative of a pond. So yeah, you haven't had enough rain. You're not seeing any ponding waters there, but there are signs of that ponding water. I would flag that because it is going to osmose through the modified bitumen. And then what's going to happen is almost very rarely does it actually get into the substrate, so into the wood, the roof deck. But it will create a steam scenario. So you get a little water in there, and then you get some heat. The heat creates steam, and now you're breaking the bond between the cap sheet, which is your top sheet, and your slip sheet that it's either adhered or glued or torn down to. So I would flag that. Now, as far as how much longer that will last, it's hard to say, depending on how old that roof already is. If it's a brand new roof and you're seeing ponding, I would flag that immediately to say, hey, this is going to cut your service life on this roof system in half. So, all right, modified bitumen.
You had mentioned, just one more quick question. You had mentioned about silicone. What about a rubberized roof? Like a rubberized roof coating. I think there's a company called Inland Coatings that has a RC 2000. Is that, and apparently that could be recoated.
Yeah, so that's gonna be silicone based.
Oh, okay.
So almost all, when you're talking about rubberized or white, almost always that is a silicone based product. Now, the difference, the problem with coatings is it seems super DIY, right? You're like, oh man, I can go to Lowe's, I can buy 5 gallon buckets of rubberized coating, and I'll just go up there and slap that on and I'm good to go. That's not the case. To get a long lasting coating, you have to treat the seam, you gotta clean the roof with a broom cleaner. You gotta treat the seams with what's called mastic, so like a highly flexible, heavy duty sealant. And then you're coating after that. And so, and to get any warranty from any company, same thing, you've gotta be manufacturer preferred. And anytime you're talking about, so let's talk about manufacturer preferred real quick, just as a sidebar. In shingles, manufacturer preferred means you call the guy and say, hey man, I would like to buy your shingles, I just need the warranty. And almost always they're gonna be like, no problem, buddy, you're in the club. We'll tell everybody you're the man. Flat roofing is not like that because there is no such thing in almost all cases as a small flat roof leak. So when you get certified through a manufacturer to do any of their commercial flat roofing stuff, you have to take the trainings, you're getting third-party inspections. It's a lot more in-depth, a lot more detailed, because you're talking much bigger liabilities. So if you go to Lowe's and put that stuff on there and you just put that product that you're saying down, there's really no warranty on that. So you're really, even with a coating, you definitely want a professional to do that. You want to know that it had, and if a professional has done it, there'll be paperwork that comes along with that roof. And so I would, as an inspector, I would notate, hey, I do see this rubberized, this coating on it. It's white. It appears to me to be silicone. Almost always if it's white, it's a silicone product of some kind, high solid silicone. I would recommend, having that looked at. I would recommend if there's any paperwork for warranty, because the warranty would be transferable from any legitimate contractor on that. But a very viable option because again, it's going to be 25% of what a new roof would cost. So if you catch it at the right time, it's done right. It's a very good avenue. Any other questions on that? I'll move on.
Most of the new commercial roofs I look at in the last couple of years with TPO.
Yes.
Seems like the EPDM rubber is less favorable.
Yes.
Do you think the TPO is a lot more durable because it's white and reflects light?
So, okay, so I've always been a higher proponent of PVC and TPO over EPDM. And this could be a cultural thing too, because I mean, really, if you go above the Mason-Dixon line, EPDM is still the king up there. Most of your government installs still spec for EPDM. I will say this: EPDM as a material is waterproof as waterproof gets. Okay, it's essentially tire material. Firestone came up with it, and who's now Elevate. I don't know why they rebranded from Firestone, but that was a great tried true name. But either way, EPDM has a great track record in the field. The downside of EPDM above TPO or as opposed to TPO PVC is you can't heat weld it. And so the seams of an EPDM are all put together with two-sided sticky tape. So you run that material over, you're priming both sides of the lap, and then you're running a tape down it and you're taping it together. And the problem with that is if you get a pond over a seam, it is eventually going to fail that seam. So if you get a pond in the middle of the field of EPDM, no problem. But if you get a pond on a seam, it will fail that material. Another downside of EPDM is as it ages, it chalks really bad. So if you've been up there crawling around on it, your hands, your knees, everything is black as can be. That chalking also prevents repairs and maintenance long term. If you get a puncture in it, to fix that, you got to clean it, prime it, and tape it. Well, if you got that chalkiness to it to be able to actually get a good adhesion on that tape, that can obviously impede the actual performability of that repair. With TPO, and that you're right, that's what you're going to see in most commercial buildings, unless you're on a restaurant or like a gas refinery plant, anywhere where there's going to be fats on the roof, which would happen in PVC, those will eat away the TPO roof. So if you're on Chipotle, that's what we see PVC, not TPO. White, you wouldn't notice the difference. We can talk about how you might be able to notice the difference in a minute, but those things are heat welded together. And so the ponding doesn't void the warranty on a TPO or PVC. Though ponding on a TPO roof specifically will shorten the lifespan of that roof. So if, for example, we're manufacturer preferred with Elevate, Firestone, and GAF, as well as a Carlisle offshoot fuel line. But all of them will warrant ponding water. They're giving you a 25-year NDL warranty, which means no dollar limit warranty, which means I carry the install for 2 years. And in the next 18 years, they cover the install, which means if we didn't keep well, seam well, or something goes wrong, they actually pay us to go out there and fix it. That's their liability. That's why they're doing those inspections and everything. However, they'll warrant that ponding water, because if you don't have ponding water on a TPO roof, just because it's under warranty for 20 years doesn't mean 21 years the roof fails. You can get 30 or 35 years out of that roof, especially if you maintain it well. If you have the ponds on it though, see, the enemy to that material is the sun. And so that's what's wearing that roof out. And so if you got ponds on it, the pond actually acts like a magnifying glass and intensifies that UV breakdown. And so it will fail in those areas. So with a PVC or an EPD, or excuse me, PVC and TPO, you have like a, what they call the base layer, which is at the bottom of the roof. They have a scrim, which is a reinforcing plastic or mesh in that material. And they have the weathering side of that, which is the TPO at the top that you see. And so that roof, if you get a puncture or you have a problem, you can heat weld to that for many, many years until that the weathering side of that has worn down enough to where you're starting to see that scrim. Once you see that scrim, you're no longer going to get a good heat weld to it. So in those ponding areas, a lot of times it'll just wear those areas away that if you get a puncture in it, there's not much you can do outside of put, a sealant on it or something like that. But to answer your question, TPO has a lot longer lifespan for the cost. It's maintainable, it's repairable a lot longer. It does have a lot of UV reflection. There's a lot of literature out there now that says it reduces urban hotspot. If you instead of having a whole city in EPDM, you have a whole city in TPO or PVC, you're getting a lot of reflectivity, which is actually changing the weather. So all of that to say, I would prefer a TPO over EPDM. So, and like I said, so PVC. So again, they're both white. An easy way to tell is looking at pipes or any inside corners. A lot of times those are pre-molded details, and they'll actually say the manufacturer on them a lot of times and what they are. So PVC or TPO. Another telltale sign if you don't see that is T joints. So you're running 10-foot sheets of membrane out. That membrane runs out middle way, and you start another piece. You now have a vertical seam there. And so anywhere where a vertical seam meets a horizontal seam, with TPO, you have to put a circle patch over that. With TPO, you do not. And so if you're not seeing T-patches through the roof, in most cases, it's either been installed wrong, or that's a PVC roof, because you don't have to have those T-patches. That's another thing to look at. The only other way you'll be able to tell is to do a test well, which obviously you guys will get into. Anything else?
You were talking about warranties, this is about flat roofs, it's about shingles.
Yeah.
But GAF is coming out with shingles, but they have been claiming unlimited warranties
Oh, yeah.
on many of their shingle products, which is ridiculous. Their shingle lasts forever. I don't think I've ever seen any that last more than 40 years or, what have you.
Yeah.
And I think they're doing that because if you actually claim the warranty, they will find something wrong with the installation almost every time. Like their inspectors are pretty good at finding a defect, or you didn't follow the GAF materials all the way through, they weren't approved installer and so on.
I pinned down one of their reps maybe 10 years ago. So GAF led the charge on the lifetime warranty. Nobody else was doing that. Architectural shingles at the time had a 30 or 35-year warranty. They started calling it lifetime, didn't change anything on the shingle, just changed the warranty. And so I'm around, man, how can y'all do? What are you doing? And he said, man, we've run the numbers. For our increase in sales versus how many people are going to know which shingle they have in 20 years, we're winning every time. And so that's what it is, man. It's a sales factor. And so they've also done the unlimited winter warranty, and they're starting to get really crazy with that kind of stuff. And anytime they do that, right, their competitors have to follow suit, otherwise they can't be competitive. But the thing is, all of those warranties are acts of God. And so the contractual definition of an act of God is anything over 60 miles an hour in some wind zones anything over 80 miles an hour in other wind zones. And so you put a 5,000-mile-an-hour wind warranty on the barred act of God, it's not gonna go over 80. Because after that, now your homeowner's insurance is in charge of that. And so a lot of that stuff is just, ain't as good as the paper is written on, to be honest with you. So, but they started it, and I'll tell you one thing, the reason we talk about GAF so much, the reason that they're in Lowe's and Home Depot, and they really cornered the market and to be one of the younger companies producing these materials, is because they've done such a great job of selling meat. They were the first ones to realize, like, the homeowner don't pick the shingle, the contractor picks the shingle. Let's make that guy our friend. And so they give you these warranties, they cover these warranties, they give you all the sales material that will help you build your web. They will do everything they can to help make guys like me successful. They started rebate programs and kickbacks and all the stuff we love, take us on fishing trips. I mean, some of the nice trips I've been on, GAF paid for it. So now would that be some certainty? I'll tell you that right now. But come on, certainty. But GAF, we only use their flat roof material because they're great to work with. They're great to help you get your roof. They're great to make you look good in front of the customer. They really do not mess around with that warranty commercially. Residentially, we get very few warranty claims residentially because houses change hands every 7 years on average, right? And even if they don't, in 20 years, I mean, every shingle that's being manufactured right now, whether it's, the best shingle or the worst shingle, will get you 20 years. And in 20 years, you don't remember who roofed it. You don't remember what's up there. You just know it's an old roof. You got a leak. You got a problem. You got to get it taken care of. Nobody's doing the paperwork on that. Maybe 1% of customers will do that. And they'll just pay it at that point because they already made $1 billion this year. Like, oh, yeah, whatever, man. Judy over here with her filing cabinet, fire a roof, whatever. Yeah, no doubt. My father-in-law, that guy. He's like, shit, man, I did this back in 1994. So, they're just gonna pay for it. So, anything else? Y'all talk about Slate and Simon? Slate. Oh,
You wanna do Slate?
yeah, fine, do Slate. All right. We'll do Slate. They're gonna see what Slate is about. Nah, now you get the one odd customer, so I'm like, I want to put Spanish tile, I like Pablo Escobar, a little down on there. Thank you. Y'all give it up for Miles over here. All right. I spent more time on this one than in case you couldn't tell. But yeah, so slate roofs. You guys here in Richmond, coastal Virginia, you're gonna see it a lot. Most of the slate you're gonna see in Northern Virginia, unless you're like in Old Town Alexandria or something, is gonna be newer installed slate or artificial slate. But we'll go through it today, what to look for. Introduction to slate roofing. Oldest roofing material in the world, still the absolute best, the Rolls Royce of roofing, and you will get a Rolls Royce price tag with it. We love it, love doing slate. But at the end of the day, it's obviously not for every house, right? 99% of homes being built in America in the last 20 years, if you put half a slate roof on it, the damn thing will collapse. So we get customers all the time, like, I'd like to see what a slate roof cost is. I'm like, all right, well, let's get a $6,000 structural engineer in here so you can tell you got to spend $250,000 reinforcing the walls. And then we'll go ahead and give you a $500,000 slate roof quote. But yeah, dude. I'll probably buy another house. You do you. So that is where obviously the artificials have come in, the stamped metals have come in, so you can get the look of slate without having to spend all the money. But for you guys, what you're going to be looking at is obviously looking for the tarred sections on the roofs. Those are all the telltale that there's been a improper repair and a leak. Being able to identify the slate, I can tell you right now, when you can look at a piece of slate and tell the customer exactly where that slate was poured, you're a genius. So, because most guys think you can do that. And then obviously, looking at different installation techniques, understanding how those slate are fastened, what the flashing details are made out of, that's what's going to count. Types of roof slate, so obviously natural slate, it's quarried all over the world. RIP Buckingham slate, it's one of the best slates right here in Buckingham, Virginia. There are no longer quarrying roofing slate, which is tragic. So, in fact, Buckingham is going to be what you're going to see most of here in central and coastal Virginia, and you're not going to be able to get it. So Buckingham's actually a phyllite. So phyllite is, so slate is shale under heat, pressure, and time. And phyllite is slate under more heat, pressure, and time. It's actually a denser stone than slate. There's only 4 phyllite quarries in the world, all 3 now. You still get some like pavers and stuff in Buckingham. They're not going to really slate anymore. But you're going to see that, and then you're going to see a ton of Vermont slate as well. So Vermont is going to be, that's when you see the color variance. You're getting like lighter grays, you're getting buff tones, you're getting some of the purples, you're getting some of the greens. Those are all Vermonts. They're quarried pretty close to each other up there in Vermont, so you get all that stuff. Of course, synthetic slates are becoming increasingly popular. The stand metal, like we talked about. And then, let's see what else I got there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Just some call breakdown there. Yes, I'll get Hollis will email this to you if you need it. Local slate quarries. The quarry widely matter. So depending on where the slate is quarried will depend on the color of the slate and the quality of the slate. When we talk about quality of the slate, what we're really talking about is absorption rate. Okay, so slate and tile and metal are the 3 that the sun is not the enemy, right? With metal, oxidation is the enemy. So anytime you're getting bare metal up there, the oxidation will burn it away. With slate and tile, it's absorption rate that is the enemy. So the more water will absorb into that stone and freeze and thaw is what's going to break that up over time. That's the weathering process for slate. So the denser that slate is, so phyllite, for example, has like a 0.000091% absorption, so no absorption. And they'll last, the life of the structure. So we've made repairs on Buckingham roofs. The slate's over 160 years old. Slate's in the same condition it was when it was installed. Just a phenomenal material. Brazil has Argentina has a couple of phyllite mines. Spain does. There are some Welsh mines that have phyllite as well. In fact, a phyllite in Wales is almost identical to the makeup of Buckingham slate. But good luck getting that. So most of what you're going to see here is, like I said, Buckingham. If it needs to be repaired, it can be repaired with a Spanish black. Not as good of a quality of slate, still lasts 100 years, and to the untrained eye, you won't be able to tell the difference. So just because you see a Buckingham slate roof doesn't mean it can't be repaired. But the like I said, the purple, the greens, a lot of those otter colors are going to be from Vermont. If you ever see a red slate, that's from New York, very rare slate. I'd be interested to see any pictures of any red slate you're seeing. But yeah, and then of course, China has their own mines too, terra slate, obviously. 8 of the iron ore. So I mean, that's the thing. Any defect in the slate, so mineral content, the clay content of a real killer is iron ore content, which is what they're finding in a lot of Buckingham, which is why they're not making roofing slate out of it anymore. It just absorbs that water. So one thing you will see in some Buckingham is you guys see what's called a rust vein. So if you see a piece of slate that looks like a crack of that is rusting, that's what it is. It's rust. That's an iron ore content in that slate. That's a weakness in the slate. So if you're climbing them, if you're one of those out there, getting it done, brave, climbing these absolute widow makers, don't step on that piece of slate. Because it will break under your feet and you will fall that roof. So again, this is just the regions, the different things. Happy to email this to you. I don't really want to go through it unless y'all want to go through it. But you study this, then you can start to look at some of the different slates and what they look like. And you can identify those. Buckingham slate quarry history. We just talked about it right here in Buckingham, Virginia. Most of the slate on the East Coast, especially colonial period slate, it's all Buckingham. You're just not gonna find it anymore. That's the problem. There are a couple of companies, my competitors, I won't tell you who, but they got a couple of pallets of stuff they can still do it. You can still find reclaim. I do have some reclaim avenues I can find where, you know, roofs have been torn off and they've kept that slate. But you're not buying new bug cam anymore. So what you're really looking for during the inspection, obviously, is broken pieces of slate, but also the installation techniques they're using. So specifically the metal that they're going to use. Now, if you're going to go up on a piece of slate or up on a slate roof, before you walk on that, one of the quick things you can test for installation is that slate going to move at all? So if you go up and you start trying to move slate and none of it moves, do not climb on that slate. It's going to break all underneath your feet. Every piece of slate should have some movement to it. The reason that slate break over time is either it's a defective slate, has iron ore in it or something like that, or it's typically settling in the house. And so put slate roof up there, it settles in the areas where it settles, it puts that slate under pressure, and that will eventually break it. If the slate is allowed to move and you can walk all over it, it won't break. Obviously, if you're starting to see a lot of slate sliding out, where it's not just one or two pieces and looks more systematic, that's indicative of the nails actually starting to fail. So you will see, not as much up in Northern Virginia, but definitely Central and Coastal Virginia, you will see some steel nail installation. And you won't be able to see that, but what you're looking at is the flashing details, right? So if the chimney flashing or the ridge flashing or the wall flashing, any flashing you can see, that's tin or steel. The nails will also be steel. And they'll just rust out, you know, over time. So again, when you're talking about most slate, it's the nails and the flashing details that will wear out. Slate will be fine. We do remove and reset on these roofs where we're taking the slate off and reinstalling the same slate. Just, you know, updating the underlayment and the nails and the flashing. So if you're seeing copper, it's typically copper nails. If you're seeing steel, it's typically steel nails. But like I said, if you're seeing a bunch of them sliding out, that's indicative of service like failure. Let's see. Oh yeah, gaps in the slate and what we call headlap. So a lot of times you will see mystery leaks in slate. Very hard to identify. A lot of times that's just a crack in the headlap where you got two bond pieces coming together. That's a needle in a haystack. I would not get bogged down in that at all. If you're seeing the leak, almost on you, this is kind of the rule of thumb for both tile and slate. If you're seeing a leak up there and you're not seeing this piece of slate, call a professional. That's it. Just stay out of it, because I've seen leaks that were so minimal to the point where it was a striation in the slate itself. It wasn't a piece of broken slate. It wasn't a piece of missing slate. We went up there 3 times and couldn't find it. And what it was is we had a horizontal striation in the slate. Water was running down and hit that horizontal striation and then running underneath the piece of slate under it. Just in the way the rock was made. Good luck finding that. I was so proud of myself for finding that. And I told the guy, like, y'all didn't even see this. I didn't do it all myself, you know. But that was a mystery leak. I mean, it can really be a leak like that. And a lot of these houses that you're gonna see on are 100-year-old houses. And so y'all know what that means. There's not plywood up there. It's 300-year-old old growth pine plank boards up there. I tell guys all the time, like, man, this can leak for 10 years before you see it on the inside, because the wood is old growth, super dense pine. It's plaster ceilings, which are inherently waterproof. But if you're raining in the attic, they wouldn't know about it for 10 years until the ceiling collapses. But I mean, I've literally seen areas where it's slate missing, where the underlayment and everything is gone. The roof deck is grayed for how long it's been exposed. They're like, oh, my roof's not leaking at all. I'm like, oh yeah, it's 100% leaking. You just don't see it inside. So, you know, but then you have a roof where you can't see nothing, and you know, you've got this mystery. So it could be, there's a lot of gray area in both directions for this. So inspection, you know, so essentially sagging roof deck, under slate deck, you know, under the slate where you're starting to see a lot of that settling. That's going to be, like I said, any of that settling and putting that slate under a tremendous amount of pressure, you're going to start getting, anytime we see tight slate or a sagging roof, we know that the maintenance cost of that roof would be a lot higher than a roof that doesn't have it. Just because it is putting that under the strain of the weight of the slate. Again, steel nails, like you're seeing steel flashings that are rusting, those nails are also beginning to rust. So it's something that, they're gonna do. Again, steel nails on a 100-year-old house, higher maintenance costs than the slate that doesn't have it. And then more overlap. So it's gonna be hard for you guys to see what the overlap is unless there are some missing slate. But essentially what the headlap means is, so you have a piece of slate that goes in, they obviously stack right beside each other. And the next piece comes in, the next course comes in over top, and that slate is staggering over those bottom lines from the one before it, and then on and on and on. Well, the slate down here, the top of that slate has to go under the bottom piece of slate 2 courses above it. So that way the water is not running in behind the slate in those bottom lines. And so the headlap refers to this slate down here. How far does this slate down here go under the bottom piece of slate 2 courses above? And so on new installation, you want 3 inches. That's what the Slaters Association has agreed on. A lot of stuff you'll see on super steep slopes are going to be 2 inches. But if you're seeing slate that are sliding out, they're still there, but they just slid down 2 inches, that's a leak. Because that headlap has come out and that water getting in behind that slate. So just because the slate is still there, you're seeing a uniform slate, and then 2 of these, 3 of these are slid down 2 inches, that you flag that, that's an actual problem that needs to be fixed. So inspecting it, so asset ventilation, so most slate roofs will have gable indents, you're not gonna see a ton of vents in the actual slate roof itself. Again, depending on the age of the house, ventilation is not nearly as critical as it is in a new construction build. Just because the same thing, the wood is all super rot and mold and pest resistant. Obviously the type of slate matters. So unless you get up there, sometimes it can be hard to tell the difference between an artificial slate and a true slate. I would say look at the ridge. So if you see ridge slate that actually match that hip and ridge, that's artificial because slate can't do that. So that's a good telltale. Obviously touching it, you would know immediately. And then, obviously any of the, so looking at Buckingham, one good way to tell Buckingham, obviously it's the dark gray, gunmetal gray slate that you see. But if you look at that in the sun, it almost looks like it has glitter in it. That's a telltale Buckingham right there. It's that mica content that you will not see in Spanish black or even a Vermont black. So that's a good one to be able to tell. And you will see a lot of streaking. A lot of times it's just algae on a slate roof, completely harmless. A soft wash can take that right off the slate without hurting anything. But you won't see it as much on the slate roof that have copper details, because the copper, as that copper oxidizes, the runoff from that actually changes the pH and kills that algae in that microbial load. It's the exact same way they create streak-free warranties in their asphalt shingles. So that's a copper fleck that's put in the granules of that shingle. That's how they prevent it from streaking to begin with. But yeah, reclaimed slate's the same thing. You're seeing like 10 broken slate up there, you're trying to get cost to cure. I don't know if some of you guys maybe do that, some of you maybe don't. I would be very worried about doing cost to cure on a slate roof because it could be $1,000, it could be $20,000. Huge range, a lot of factors that go into that you're honestly not going to be able to see without doing a structural cut. But always look to see there's a stack of slate laying around, because if you see a slate that, a lot of times they would keep the slate and stack it on the end. You see it laid flat, a lot of times the slate would be good because of freezing thaw on the layers, but they're stacked like a book on the end. Those slate will last forever sitting on the ground. So if you see those, you can say, hey, well, there's some slate missing, but it will be cheaper because you have slate. What's it going to cost? Like, we'll call it. So that's slate. Any specific questions on slate? I can't breeze to it. No, slate expert. Oh, no, we got one. Or are you shredder?
No.
Okay.
Is slate installation and cedar shake installation similar?
Similar, yeah. I mean, all slate roofing is similar to a degree. So with shake, you're getting more layers of that. You're stacking them in tighter. The top of that shake is actually going 4 courses up instead of 3 courses up. And all of your new shake installation and even old shake installation, you're you're actually taking your tar paper or you're underlaying it, and you run a row of shape, and then the headlap of that's actually getting covered with tar paper. And then you're running a layer, so you're interweaving that underlayment into the system. You don't have to do that in Slate. You do that in shape because specifically now, with new red cedar, you're not getting any of the old growth cedar. And so the difference between old growth pine and old growth cedar, we're getting off on a tangent here, but I am a building material nerd. Is the taproot of that tree. So any evergreen has a taproot that goes in the ground as far as the tree is out of the ground. So you got a 100-foot tree, you got a 100-foot taproot, okay? In a GMO tree, they engineered out that taproot so they can go from sapling to harvestable tree in 25 years instead of 200 years. Okay, well, what that does is in the, you're getting a harvestable tree, but that tree is nowhere near as dense. So you cut that open, you cut an old growth cedar or old growth pine down, you can barely fit a razor blade in between the rings of that tree. Very tight, very densely packed. A GMO tree, you put your thumb between those rings. You go to Lowe's or Home Depot and look at how wide those rings are in that wood. That's the difference. Okay, so same thing with cedar. So cedar, if it's old growth, is inherently waterproof to some degree. The new cedar is only waterproof after it's gotten wet for an hour and swells. And so for the first hour of any given rainstorm, you're relying on that underlayment for your waterproofing as opposed to the actual roofing material itself. So that is the principal difference. Obviously, slate is inherently completely waterproof. It's not absorbing any of that water. You're not relying on any of that underlayment. So that is the difference there. And because of that, you don't have to have such wide. So you can't do slate that's 3 inches wide because your headlaps will be too close. You don't worry about that with the cedar because same thing, you're covering that headlap with underlayment.
Is there a percentage of slate that's missing or damaged that you would say re-roof versus try to repair?
So that's a good question. I would look at it, and the answer is I can't tell you. That's case by case. There's no hard rule of thumb there. Now I will say that if you've got some slate missing and there's 20 spots of tar up there, so anytime you see tar, it's because somebody didn't know how to pull that slate out and put a piece of slate in the right way. They just went up there and tarred it down. Now the problem is where I could have just replaced one piece of slate. Now I'm replacing all of the slate because you tarred them all together. There's no way I'm getting one piece out without breaking. So the way you pull that piece of slate out, you're taking a slate ripper, which should have brought in my tool, passing around like elementary school. Slate ripper is a long, wide steel bar, about this long. It's got almost like a hammerhead sharp end to it, 2 hooks on either end. You run that thin bar up underneath the slate and you're hooking the nails, and then it's got a handle on it with a blunt end, and then you're taking your roofing hatchet and you're beating those nails out. So you're pulling that slate out. You're not prying up with it. So you pry up on it, you're going to break that slate, the slate above it, the slate above it. So you're pulling that slate straight down. And then you're taking your next piece of slate and you're sliding it in there. And then the bond line, so where the slate above it come together, you got that gap right there. You mark that gap, you're taking your slater's hammer, which looks like an ice pick on one end and a small hammer on the other end. You're taking that ice pick in and you're popping holes in that slate. You run it back up and put nails in that hole. And then you're taking a piece of copper or steel, depending on what the rest of the roof is. You're cutting barbs in it and you're sliding it up. We call that a baby. Slide that baby up in there to where it covers those nails in that bond line, where it goes up underneath the slate up here. So as the water runs down, you can't get to those nail holes. It's running down over that piece of metal and out from the ground. You can't tell anything's been done. Now, that's how you repair a piece of slate. If you've tarred 10 slate together, I can't pull that slate out anymore. Now I got to take all the slate out, and then you're creating a much larger problem. So if you're seeing all that, you know they've been continuously having problems, and you're seeing that. Adversely, if you are looking in the bond lines and you're seeing pieces of black metal or copper, where you can say, hey man, this thing's been already had 25 slate replaced, where you can see, even if they've been done right, you know that this is an ongoing problem. They're constantly having slate slide. And that's something that where you would say, it looks like the maintenance. I would never say, hey, this roof needs to be replaced or not. I would never put that into slate at all. I would say this slate roof looks like it's going to have a higher maintenance cost than some of the other ones I've seen. And I'd leave it at that.
Yeah, so the way you described doing the slate replacement, back when I was doing fire and water restoration work all the way back in the 90s, there was an old school guy. That was the only way he'd do it. And if he saw a clip, he'd go nuts.
Oh, yeah.
And should we write up clips
Yeah, so yes and no. So if you see the old school, like flat piece of copper bent over, yes, write that up. Because eventually that's just gonna slide back out. And then you got, a piece of stone that's incredibly sharp on the end that's gonna slide out and maybe hit you in the head. So you're not gonna survive that, not even that much of a distance. So that's the problem. And also something you don't want to step on if you're seeing that. However, specifically in Europe, and in some installations here in America, we are starting to do slate clipped systems. And so you will now see a copper or stainless clip that it's about the same thickness or gauge as a coat hanger. And it's a clean little clip right there at the bottom of it. That is a slate clip. It is designed for that. It is robust. That is a proper slate. They are installing entire roofs without nails, and it's a fully clipped system. So you can use a slate clip like that. So if you see that, you'll know the difference. It looks like a coat hanger holding it. That's acceptable. I wouldn't flag that. But if you're seeing flat metal, I would flag that. Down to 10 minutes? 10 minutes. Well, thank you. You've got a lot of questions. I'll go down. Yeah.
You want to get him,
Oh, yes, sir.
Can you talk just a bit about artificial slate, different types?
Yeah, so artificial slate is all compressed aggregate. And it depends on the manufacturer for the recipe there. I would say that the problem that artificial tile and slate kind of snake oil too, okay? It's one of those where, yes, there are some competitors, there are some manufacturers that have been in business a long time selling that. They are probably on their 10th generation recipe by this point. They bend, they shrink, UV breaks them down. They're just historically not been great roofs. It's one of those where when you're talking to the manufacturer and you're looking at the warranty has its own insurance policy and a different LLC, that's a huge red flag, okay? That's a huge red flag. That's commonplace practice for those companies. However, does that necessarily mean the roof is failing? It does not. I mean, if you're seeing the curling, that artificial slate is shrinking. That's why it's starting to curl. That's something that I would flag. But again, unless it's missing, unless it's actively leaking, it's very difficult to know how much longer does that roof have. I would just, hey, this roof is curling, okay? And I would almost say to like, if the roof is starting to curl like that, I would just call that indicative of end of service life. Is how I would stay away from it needs to be replaced. And if they ask you about it, I'll tell them, listen, insurance company comes by and sees that curl and they're gonna make you replace it. And then I'd stay out of it from there. Because there's so much gray area there. Depending on what the underlayment is, depending on, how long that roof's been up there, what warranty's on it, all that kind of stuff. So it's not missing, it's not actively leaking. I would just flag the curling as a potential problem and then move on. I wouldn't really, same thing. Very, very tricky getting from y'all's perspective, very tricky getting in the weeds on stuff like that. So that's almost same thing. Have a licensed roofer take a look at it. Something that's a concern, how much of a concern as an inspector, I don't know. Get a roofer out here. That's what I would do for that. Microphone?
I was just curious, what you thought about the cedar breather, with the peel and stick, then a cedar breather, because you were talking about the shakes with the number 30 asphalt paper between. And I remember that from years back, but then it seems like what I'm mainly seeing is some type of polypropylene non-woven mesh, what I knew is cedar breather.
Yeah, that's exactly what that is. Yes.
Yeah.
So the cedar breather is not waterproofing.
Right.
So
that underneath.
exactly. So you're using a high temp ice and water fill underneath. Same thing until that cedar swells, the underlayment is the waterproofing.
Yeah.
The reason that cedar breather is there is so that way any of that water that's in there after it gets watertight is allowed to breathe out. That's why you're using that. So yes, if you're not doing an interwoven system like that, you have to do that cedar breather.
Yeah. Which do you prefer?
I prefer the interwoven.
Do you find that performs better as far as the felt doesn't hold the moisture And
It just doesn't let it in behind the cedar to begin with. So if I was gonna do a cedar roof, I would do the high temp ice and water shields. And then I would do the interwoven with the tar, that's how the tar, that's how I would do it. And same thing, the tar, the cedar breather, so I did the, actually roofed the Hopewell Manor House at City Point. I don't know if you've ever been there or not, so actually pretty big feather like that. That's all old growth cypress on that, it's a beautiful roof. But we use cedar breather on that, even though cypress is inherently completely waterproof. Because that has a natural occurring creosote in it called cypressine. But that's one of the only cedar breather jobs that I ever did. And I think it was more or less just an additional caution for the spec by the government. So you need to do the right thing. And they're smarter than me anyway, don't do that part. Yeah, very efficient. So we use it on that. And so I have seen it, I have used it on smaller things, but I think the best case scenario is you're using a heavy grade underlayment. So if you're getting some water in there, it's already protecting it. And then, but the thing about the tar paper is, that's gone 25, 35, 45 years, tried and true. And cedar breather, same thing. It's, 10 years old, 15 years old on the outside. So I like the stuff that has a proven track record of working. So, but both of them completely acceptable installation practice for sure.
I don't see many of the cedar roofs that, shape roofs like that.
Yes, well, because you're not anymore, again, if you get old road bread, then no problem, but now it's like, people have done it, and they're like, well, my first cedar roof lasted, 40 years, this was 10 years old, and I'm like, yeah, that's the difference in the quality of the wood. So,
Yeah. Thanks.
yes, absolutely.
Anybody else?
Henderson's roofs.
I'm sorry,
Henderson's roofing.
Henderson roofing, okay, what about it?
Hendricks. Yeah, they still in business?
Hendricks, it's not ringing a bell.
Concrete.
Oh, God, concrete tile? Yeah. All right, so when we talk about tile roofing, we talk about absorption rate. Concrete's famous for absorbing water. Okay, we used to call it Norfolk tiles, actually, is what we call those. Same kind of thing. It is a tile knockoff. I'll tell you that most tile is not designed for this climate zone. Most tile is designed for Florida, Arizona, and California. Why? Because they don't ever freeze there. So they're worried more about the sun than they are absorption. And so there are a ton of tile that people are shipping up out of Arizona or from Florida. They're using them here, and then they bust off the hill because they're getting a freezer thaw. Concrete didn't really bust up like that, to its credit, because concrete also is inherently waterproof, right? However, it did weather in enough where you start getting chipping and flaking and cracking at the top. So did it perform? Yes. Did it look good while it was doing it? No, it did not. So very expensive, very heavy installation to have a old looking roof at a very short period of time. So, but as far as performance, wind uplift, lasting a long time, being pretty energy efficient, it did check those boxes. Anybody else?
Is there ever a legitimate reason to use roof action? Doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say I would use that. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I recommend my competitors use those.
Do you know anything about the recycled tire roofing?
Yes, so that falls into the synthetics. Same thing, again, that's just a new recipe for a synthetic. So, Brava Tile, I think, is one of the leaders of that kind of that recipe, more or less. And some other stuff in it too, but they are using that. They actually, most of the roofs you see at Disney World are Brava Tile. We've done one or two of those. Again, just not a huge proponent of artificial synthetics like that. They just don't have a track record.